We're on part 1 now, chapter 18, the cardiovascular system, and we're looking at the heart. We're beginning on page 658 and 659, and we have the big overview here of the circuitry of the blood as it passes through the body. I like to think of this as meals on wheels, and blood is described as the only fluid tissue of the body, and it represents a relatively small portion of the fluid of the body. It says here, something in the vicinity of 5 to 6 liters of blood for the average male, a little bit less than that, 4 to 5 liters of blood for the average female. So that sort of ends up somewhere around 5 liters or so, and it's being pumped by the heart, and that provides, at least on the arterial side, the activity here. Actually, anywhere that we have blood moving away from the heart, whether it's in the circuit going to the lungs or the circuit coming to the main system, we have 2 circuits. The right side of the heart serves pumping of the blood to the lungs, and the left side of the heart serves the rest of the systemic blood circuit. Okay, we have the nutrients coming from the gut, so we have freshly derived nutrients from food sources, and then we need to add to that the oxygen of the lungs. This is a low pressure system that goes to the lungs and picks up that final component. And then when we come out the aorta here, then we have a complete complement of all substrates that the body needs, all of the essential nutrients from eating food, and all of the last essential nutrient from breathing. So we have that, and we have the full complement then going to the body. I call this meals on wheels because there's motion involved. We have something like 40 to 50 trillion cells, and they're in situ for the most part, and so they need to be fed, as it were, nourished by capillaries close at hand, as well as cleaned of waste products, similarly from capillaries close at hand. So the endothelial matrix really matters here. Okay, and we'll spend a little bit of time. Basically, the idea here, when we get beyond the heart, is we're going to learn about the vessels, and there's going to be the intimacy then of capillaries within reach of every single cell of the body, at least by diffusion, and providing nutrients and removing wastes. Okay, so the system then is presented to us, and we'll press on here to look at the overview of this pumping device. As we look at it in the parts of the body that we're familiar with, the skeleton, we can see here that below the second rib we have a little bit of information, and let's sort of see how the artist has constructed this situation here. 1, 2, so right here and right here, actually right here, we're listening to heart sounds. Right here and right here we're listening to heart sounds. So the heart is resting on the diaphragm. The diaphragm is going up and down with each breath, and the heart takes a ride. As you can see here, the heart is resting on its right side. This is the right ventricle, the left ventricle. We have the right atrium over here with its little auricle, and the left atrium here with the left auricle. I think of these as sort of like little Dumbo ears, right? So they wrap around the great vessels up here at the top. Basically, this is a anatomical and embryological development that arises from actually vessels originally, and as we progress through the phylogenetic history of our ancestry, our vessels reconform and create this muscular pump, and it has 4 chambers. Okay, and it's growing basically against the serous membranes here, and it's closing a bag, as it were. So what's surrounding this is pericardium, just as in the lungs, what's surrounding the lungs is pleura. In this situation, the diaphragm is right here, operated by the phrenic nerve. The heart has its own electrical system, which is modified by the sympathetic and parasympathetic. The sympathetic can speed it up, and the parasympathetic slows it down to the resting rate that we would normally have while seated or standing still. Okay, so it's important to remember that, how shall I say, the Edgar Allan Poe poem of the beating of the telltale heart. The heart does have its own electrical system, and I think it's at the heart that we learn about all of the, how shall I say, poetic expressions that are actually true. The heart does have heartstrings, and we do have to beat from the bottom of our hearts in order to make the fluid work. So we're dealing with a fluid tissue in this case, which is a very unusual thing to think about, and it's important to view it that way. Okay, we begin here at this particular view right here, which they're going to magnify. What's happening here is that the heart has grown up, and as it's grown through fetal development, embryological and fetal development, it has basically closed a space, and that space is referred to as the pericardial sac. Okay, so you have to imagine that this was a very small thing at first, and then it grew, and it grew against the membranes that were holding fluid, and as it closed the bag, and now that space is what we call a potential space. Let's come over here and look at this. Here is the wall of the heart. It's a muscular wall. So cardiac muscle represents one of the three types of muscle: skeletal, cardiac, and smooth. Cardiac is a striated muscle. Okay, and we'll get into some of the dynamics of it in this chapter. On the inside of the heart, where the blood resides, and wherever red blood cells go, red blood cells always see what's referred to as endothelium. The endothelium is actually a simple squamous epithelium. So you have to think about that. It is a very thin membrane that's only one cell in thickness, and it's supported by an underlying connective tissue. Okay, so we have something here that could be described as the endocardium. So the endocardium then is made up of the endothelium, that simple squamous epithelium with an underlying loose connective tissue. There are some things passing through there in the manner of, how shall I say, the house wiring, as it were. Okay? But basically it's a thin little area right here, and red blood cells and white blood cells, when they see the inside of wherever the blood travels, they're looking at simple squamous epithelium, but we've decided to call it endothelium. Next we have the myocardium, which is just the muscle itself, okay, the cardiac muscle. Then we get to another connective tissue, and then we get to the first layer of the pericardium. The pericardium, as we sort of magnify this a little bit, again, the visceral, what we're calling the visceral pericardium, the portion of the pericardium against the organ, is a simple squamous epithelium, again. And it comes this way, it folds over. We have a little fornix right there, spelled fornix. And on this side of the sac, we have the parietal pericardium. So the parietal layer of the pericardium. Okay, so I've modified this diagram so that it conforms with the sort of official way in which University of California and University of Texas, etc., want us to learn everything about these little structure and terminology. We'll pick that up in part 2.